Have you ever had a creative idea, but sharing it with the world just sounds terrifying? Maybe you've wanted to write a book, or sing in public, or dance, act, paint, or maybe start a podcast. Or maybe you just want to be more of the real you while you're out there living your life. Today, I'm talking with my friend Gina Puorro about how to overcome the fear and doubt that arise when you want to share your creativity, how to cultivate your authentic voice, and tips for doing all of this without absolutely frying your nervous system in the process. So let me introduce you to Gina. Gina Puorro is the author of The Wild Will Call You Back, which is a collection of poetry and prose, and that's an exploration of cycles and seasons, an inquiry into love and grief, and an invitation to tend the inner wild. She is a student of magic, love, grief, intimacy, myth and story, ritual arts, and the wild and vast terrain that we call nature. Gina's writing is inspired by the exploration of good questions, by relating with her human and non-human kin, and by her pursuit of beauty and awe. Gina hopes to live with her heart open, her voice free, her mind curious, and her feet rooted in love. I am so lucky to call this woman my friend, and after you listen to this episode, I think you're going to feel lucky to have experienced her too. Here is my conversation with Gina. We're talking about creative expression. What does it mean to be a creatively expressive person? Is it just like doing art projects and being crafty?
I really see it as just sharing who we truly are. And I think you could call that soul or spirit or essence, however you want to say it. I think it's just allowing that to come through. And that can be through what we traditionally think of as art, painting and drawing and writing. But I also think it could be making a garden or cooking a meal or how we love or how we teach. And I think it's just really letting our own individual essence and voice and expression to come through for the world to see and experience.
I really like that. And it gives me hope because I cannot draw at all. Right. But
I
that's
can't
something
either.
yeah. But like my husband and I talk about that, like our love for each other is an art form. The way that I love him, I can be artful in that. And yeah, and I like that you're linking it to who we really are all the way down. So are you saying that we are inherently like creative beings, or just embracing who we are is a creative practice, or both of that?
I think it's both. I think that we all have things within us, that those little shimmers of inspiration or ideas that pop up or intuition about things that we want to bring forward. And I think we all have that. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to hear it or tap into it. But, humans have been creating since the beginning of time. We see cave art and tools and adornments, jewelry and things. So I think it is something that's been a part of us as long as we've been around.
It reminds me of Elizabeth Gilbert's book, Big Magic, where she says something along the lines of, we are all born with these gems inside of us. And we get to choose if when we depart, when we pass, that those gems are buried along with us, or if we have left them on earth.
Yes.
We get to decide, are we going to share that or not? And so let's talk about you as a poet, as a writer. You clearly have these gems, these insights, these ideas, these expressions within you. Is that something that has been a really natural, easy thing in your life to share those gems? Or has it been a practice of learning how to do that? Give us a little background of how you have stepped into a published poet.
It's actually something fairly new for me, maybe within the last 5 years. And it has not come easily for me to share it, especially in a public way. I feel like I've just stumbled my way through that, luckily with a lot of support. An old teacher of mine from 3rd grade connected with me on social media and sent me a picture of a project that I did, way back then, and said I wanted to be an author. And I think so often we're so much more connected to these things when we're children because we're not overthinking it and we're not judging ourselves the way we do now. So I think that can be a great little nugget of direction and inspiration to think about what did we love as a child and what did we feel free to do when we were children. I started writing really out of a place of extreme loneliness, and I was going through a really hard time in my life and didn't have a lot of connection where I could express myself. So I just started writing. Just had some little poems start to spring up, and I kind of kept them to myself for a while. And at one point I shared one on social media, and one of my friends was like, "Oh, who wrote that?" And I was like, "Well, I did." And I think people who knew me were just really surprised, because I've always been pretty, in a lot of ways, shy and reserved and very timid about sharing my voice. Just something I'm still working through, honestly, just in fear of judgment and rejection and, all those things. And I think this all also speaks to, you mentioned the gem, and we all have deep wounds. And sometimes there's like that one primary wound that has such a big gem in it. If we can kind of lean into it and find a way to create and express from that place, I think that's another way that we can really share our unique essence and journey through this life, that no one else is going to, no one else is going to have the same experience or perspective or the same gem to bring forward.
It's so interesting to me that you talked about, I sort of stumbled my way through that experience of sharing my writing. And then you immediately after started talking about how this has been something that's been with you since you were a child. And when we think of a child learning how to walk, they are in some way stumbling, right? But it's not like a fumbling. They are learning to walk. They are doing it. That is part of the practice of doing it. And it's interesting to me that you said that, like stumbling through, when how else could you move through? And this idea that maybe wobbliness or like the shakiness of your voice as you start sharing is just part of it, rather than it being a reason why you shouldn't. What if you want to start sharing and you're like, but I might be really sweaty, or I might be shaking, or do you need to wait until your voice is like sure and calm before it matters? Like, obviously not, but I'd love to hear what you think.
I think that especially if this is something new and feels scary, and I'm a highly sensitive person, so it's, this has been a very nerve-wracking experience for me, and I've needed to take it in very small steps. I think it's been important for me to find a balance between knowing there's never going to be a perfect time. We could be preparing and waiting till we're ready our whole lives. And I'm constantly thinking about how I could die next week. And, maybe I could have been sitting on my book all this time, waiting for it to be perfect, and it would never make it into the world. So I think it's important to find that balance between knowing that it's going to be scary and you have to just do it scared, and it's going to be wobbly, and that's just part of it. And it's also been important for me to know that I don't have to push myself so far beyond my edges that it's absolutely awful. I I've felt a lot of pressure to really take big leaps. I think there's a lot of that messaging that we take in from various places. And there can be a lot of value in that, and in taking really big leaps. And I think it's also really valuable to take your time and really go at your own pace and take breaks when you need to. And that's going to look different for different people. Different people are going to have much more capacity than I have to take in, some of the things that can bounce back to you when you really put yourself out there. And some people might need to take it slower than I did.
Yeah, I think it's do it scared and resourced, scared and supported, not just scared and with consent for myself. Is this the right time? It's interesting hearing you talk about, I've actually only been writing for 4 or 5 years, when I've known you for about 4 or 5 years, and I have always known you as a writer, because that's just how you've always been sharing in that way since I've met you. It's interesting to hear that actually that was sort of new for you when we started spending time together. And I'd love to hear what the journey looked like for you. So you started writing on Instagram. How did you get from, I feel like I don't have someone to express to writing, to posting on Instagram to now you have a book that is sold over 1,000 copies, like a self-published book, but you have no advertising. People just can't not buy it because it's so good. Like, how did that happen? When you talk about, I was scared and wobbly and I didn't want to push myself too much, I actually went kind of slow. How did that look for you?
I was going through a really tough time. I'd just had a big breakup and I'd gotten really sick and I just didn't have a lot of connection and resources, and started writing in that place because I really just didn't have anywhere else to put it, but I needed to get some things out. And not long after that, started to connect with beautiful people and groups and circle work and things that were really starting to help me feel connected and well-resourced. And I had people that I could go to for support. And I had collected some tools at that point to really know how to take care of myself. And I think it was also important early on for me to, sometimes I would kind of test out sharing things with people that I really trusted with my heart and my sensitivity. Because people aren't always, especially sharing in a public way like social media, people are not always so kind, in how they respond to it. So it was helpful for me to have people that I could kind of check in with first. And it was so helpful to me early on to have people that I knew loved me and cared about me and were supporting me for real and getting their kind of feedback and encouragement. I just started sharing things more on social media and started a blog, and people just started responding to it in a really positive way, which really tripped me out at first. And that really kind of gave me, I hate to say permission, but it did feel like, it was the kind of the sign that I was on the right track. And sometimes I'll get a message from somebody just saying, like, you have no idea how this particular piece has helped me or impacted me. And that part of it is just so beautiful because I could have held that in and not shared it. But I did. And there's a ripple effect to anything that we share of ourselves.
Yeah. So that's an interesting point, because someone reaches out to you on Instagram and says, thank you for saying this because I have a similar experience. And oftentimes as we go to express ourselves, there's this possible story or lie that we're told or we tell ourselves of, there's nothing new that you could write. Someone else has already written about that. Someone else has already created art about that thing. But as you said, it's you with your voice, filter it through and create your flavor of that art. And so does it matter that it's the same ideas?
No one can do it like you. And I think about, what if Mary Oliver or Bell Hooks or, people like that, if they were like, my writing's not great, I'm not going to share it. This world would quite literally be a different place. Or like your favorite band, I feel like we all have an album that got us through a very difficult time in life. It's like, what if they never did that? What if they never, if they spent their whole lives trying to get it right before they shared it? We would actually be different people and the world would be a different place. I don't think it matters at all if things have been done already. It's no one's going to do it like you because no one is you.
It's interesting because art can directly affect someone else's experience if they resonate with what you're saying. And even if they don't, if I don't understand the experience that you went through that you're writing about, but I see that you are allowing yourself to be fully expressed in that truth of who you are, it also changes the world because it allows me to think maybe I could also share my experience or live with who I really am authentically because Gina is doing that. Gina is allowing herself to do it. So maybe I could do it. So even if the art itself doesn't resonate with people, it changes the world in that way too. It allows everyone the opportunity to think about maybe exactly who I am is okay too.
Yeah, it's such a powerful permission slip to say, okay, they're just letting themselves get weird and, like full out be every last bit of themselves. And if they can do that, then I can too. That's just such a powerful creative expression to just be all of who you are.
I know we are both super aunties and strongly relate to the role of being an aunt and take that really seriously. And I know you and I have had conversations about looking at these little ones who we love, who are still so themselves and so untouched by the depths of conditioning or societal pressure or expectation. And we've had so many conversations of, oh, I hope she holds that. I hope she holds that. Because like we're talking about adults that we see that we are inspired by them being fully themselves, but also like looking at like the youngest of us and being inspired by that, in awe of how precious it is. And for me, it's also a reminder to, I need to keep doing this for me so that she, so that he, so that they can see that it's okay. It's not that we aren't born that way. We are. It's protecting that and keeping it possible going forward.
Yeah. And you're making me think about elders who I've worked with. Part of the wisdom that they're sharing through who they are is I almost feel like so often they've just come full circle. Like they've gone through life and found a way to come back to that childlike playfulness and curiosity. I don't think anyone's really a master of anything. I feel like that's like the true elder wisdom, to be like, I'm just going to stay curious and, and play and explore. I feel like we all have that when we're kids, and then, life does its thing and takes so much of that from us. And then we spend years trying to find our way back to it. So it's such a gift to be around children, and I love being an aunt and, love just getting super silly and playful and roll around in the grass. And, they just do things because they want to. They don't create because they want to make something perfect. They're not thinking about, oh, will this sell? Or will anyone like this or react to it or comment on it? None of that. I've watched my nieces and nephew, they'll create little art projects and they're like, okay, next thing, they just like toss it aside and move on. They're just doing it because it's fun. They're just creating just to create. It's not for anything other than that.
Yes. And it's amazing how it would never pop into our minds to be critical of the way that they are expressing or playing or experimenting with life, with creating things, with art, with having fun, with learning. And again, it's that we need to come full circle, come back all the way around to, I'm allowed to do this. I'm allowed to do it without being an expert, and without being an expert at first, and maybe without ever even coming close.
Right. I remember the tenderness of starting school, and art projects get graded. So it starts so young when we're told like, well, this is wrong. This could be better. That one's better than yours because that was an A and you got a C, or, whatever the case is. You had made such a beautiful suggestion to me recently to put a picture of myself as a child on my phone wallpaper. And it's been so sweet to just really connect back to that sweet, silly child that is still in me, and really try to remember to come from that place.
Yeah, like our inner children, they're still in us, but more than that, that's who we are. We are that same person. It's just a few years have passed, and just coming back to all the ways that we've just forgotten who we are, and for ways that make sense because we want to belong or we want to feel safe or feel loved. And again, it's coming back around to remembering that we are already inherently worthy of those things, just like kids are, just like precious little babies are. So how do we start to hear our voice, cultivate our voice? If we want to start sharing, but we aren't even sure who we are all the way down, because we're saying that essentially our voice is, and our artistry, our creativity is just who we authentically are, and expressing that. But what if we aren't really sure who we are?
I think something that can be a really great practice is if you have these little moments of inspiration or intuition, to just go with it and not try to make sense of it. I might have a little moment of being like, I would love to just sit down and doodle or make a collage. And then my adult conditioned brain would be like, well, why? There's no purpose in doing that. So I think it can be a nice practice to learn to just trust yourself to go with those little nudges and just see what happens, and try to let go of the need for it to make logical sense or for it to have a specific outcome. I think that's another big thing too, is really practicing letting it come through you without attachment to what it's going to do. which is very difficult, because so many things in this world are very transactional and, well, we do this so we get that. And creativity doesn't play by those rules. It's not necessarily something that's going to be our profession. We can create just to create. And I think that's a very hard concept to take in. And, we're talking so much about our inner child. I think it can be fun to really think about, what did I do as a kid just for the fun of it? Because so often that thing is still in us. I didn't even remember that I wanted to be an author when I was in third grade, but there was something there. I can look back to little things that I just enjoyed doing just for the fun of it, that I kind of let go of because I didn't see a purpose, or I didn't feel like a grown-up thing to do. I think so much of this is just letting yourself play and explore and just being really curious. Why did I just have the impulse to do that? Or what's that little desire about? And not judging it and just letting yourself get really curious and explore and play with it.
It's an interesting thought to notice how internalized capitalism might be what you call it, but the idea that purpose is equal to productivity or equal to it being a valuable or desired exchange of some kind, or it being worth money, right? When purpose could be, I'm exploring expression. That's the purpose of this. The purpose could be, I'm having fun, or I'm trying to learn how to have fun. Maybe we don't even know how to have fun anymore because we've been so productivity focused or output focused or whatever it is. But creating space for ourselves to explore, like you said, being curious. What does it feel like to make a collage as a grown woman? Turns out it's really fucking fun. And that's good enough.
Yeah, that's the purpose. That can be the whole goal. Just have fun.
So let's talk about how this goes. If you're wanting to share your expression the way that you chose to, you published a book. You mentioned it's okay to do it scared, but not pushing too far, making sure that you're honoring your own pacing and your own timing with that. So what does that look like? How do I know that this is like a healthy edge, maybe people call it, of not being as comfortable as I am just alone in my room, but also not pushing myself beyond what I'm ready for? What do you think about that? How does that feel in your body? What's your relationship to figuring that out?
This is something I really have a hard time articulating because it's a feeling in my body. I think that when I'm pushing an edge, it feels a bit more like something that you've done where you're nervous, but you're excited. So there's butterflies, but it's still something you're looking forward to. That feels like a yes to me. And there's still been so many times I've put something out and then just kind of like cringe. But there's been other times I've shared things and then immediately deleted them before because it just like my whole body just feels contracted and it just feels like such a clear no. There was things I never shared on social media, but I did put in the book because I just did not want to subject myself to the possibility of how people might comment or react. So that's been just another kind of general self-care practice and cultivation that's still ongoing for me to really feel what's a yes and what's a no. And the things that are too much just really feel like a no in my body.
That's so important to recognize that for most of us, our bodies don't speak in words. They do speak to us, but the language is sensation, feeling, like linking it to other feelings that you felt in the past. And I really like this idea that you have of identifying how your body is talking to you. And if you have had an example of maybe you're on a date with someone and you really like them, a first date, and you're anticipating they're going to kiss you at the end of the date. And that feeling of like, oh, it's like excited dread, but also wanting it so much. That feeling of the excitement and noticing in your body what it feels like to feel an excited and nervous yes. And thinking back to a time that you know that you felt that in retrospect. And then maybe thinking of the opposite. If you have an opposite time, if that's not too much for you to think about, but just noticing, like, does this feel like that? What does my body feel like when I'm excited and also a little nervous? And then what we were saying before, how can I support myself during that process? Maybe on a first date, it's kind of awkward to like bring your best friend for moral support. But if you're about to release a book or put your first poem on social media, maybe being at a friend's house when you do that. Or if you're about to do a first open mic night, invite someone who's like one of your best cheerleaders and just ask them to help you, because we don't want to completely outsource validation, but we are also social beings, and belonging is important for us. We wouldn't have survived as a species if it wasn't innately extremely important for us to feel like we belong. So we can lean into that and use that to help us through that.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I actually started the first draft of my book in your living room. And I literally don't think I would have gotten it going on my own, just because I would sit home and, worry about the font size. Just like, I always found a way to not do it. And, and I went to my first open mic night with our dear friend Erin, and wouldn't have been able to do that without her. So that support and encouragement is just so important along the way.
Yeah, it's how we learn. We learn everything by our own experience and also by other people. And so why all of a sudden, if we're about to try something really new and vulnerable, there's this story out there, like, just do it. And I think it's also our like American individualist, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and systems that make that impossible type of thing. It's okay to need support. You should need support. It's normal. It's natural to want to do it with other people.
Yeah, and I think it's important to have that for both the hard parts and for the joy. It's actually been very difficult for me to celebrate my book, and times that poems got a lot of attention. I found it so important to have that connection and support to help me actually celebrate and not start to tell myself a lot of the negative stories that I've carried with me for a long time about my own expression and my voice. And, there's been hard times with this too. I think one of the, I hate to say risks, but I think one of the challenging parts of really openly sharing all of yourself and your voice is that if there is critique or negative feedback, it feels like an attack on who I am. It's like I'm sharing a piece of my heart, and then people are just stomping all over it.
As you gear up for sharing in some way, and there's an opportunity to preemptively resource ourselves and say, okay, if I get negative feedback, this is how I'm going to support myself. And if I get positive feedback, this is how I'm going to support and celebrate myself. So how have you handled criticism or quote negative feedback, or feedback of someone saying, what are you even talking about? This doesn't make sense. And the people that also say, thank you so much. Like, what has your journey with that been like?
The negative feedback piece was sort of trial by fire, because I wrote a poem shortly after the abortion laws were passed in Texas. I wrote it in bed, drinking coffee on a Sunday morning because I was really pissed off, and just put it out there. And the next day it just started going. It was insane. There were thousands of comments, and some of them were amazing, but some of them were extremely cruel, especially given the topic. And people were sending me private messages and contacting me through my webpage. And it was a lot, it felt like very personal attacks. And that was a time I really needed my people to just kind of hold me through that. And I had to really I had to stop reading things. I just stopped looking at comments. Social media is a very public space, and people were talking about me as if I wasn't going to read it. And sometimes it was very much directly at me. And I just had to step away and stop taking that in, because it wasn't helpful at all. It really wasn't serving me in any way. So I had to just be resourced with my connections, people that know me and could reflect back to me who I am, and really take a lot of space from the places where that negative feedback was coming in, and just not engage with it. I didn't reply to a single thing. It's become very important to me to protect my energy and how I spend my energy. And it just does not feel productive to me in any way to respond to any of that kind of negativity.
So when you receive negative feedback, is there a part of you that thinks it shouldn't bother you? What's your relationship with that? Because some advice, quote advice, is don't be so sensitive. You know that poem you wrote, for example, after the abortion laws were changed, you know that you were fully in support of your belief. You were not shaky on what you believe is a right or what you believe is injustice. And even still, it was hard for you to navigate that. So, but some people are like, well, just don't let it bother you. What's your reaction to that?
Oh, that has just been a lifelong journey for me, honestly. I have always been extremely sensitive, and I think for a long time saw it as a huge weakness. And I've heard that so many times in my life, like, oh, don't be so sensitive or don't take it personally. But I am, and I do. It's something I'm constantly working with and have really tried to embrace my sensitivity as a superpower. Going back to what we were talking about of the gem within the wound, that's been a big part of my journey and my process in sharing. I honestly hate when people say that to me, that don't be so sensitive, because it's just who I am. And I actually think it's a really beautiful thing that I can feel things so deeply. It's an incredibly difficult way to go through life, but it's just part of me. It's part of my journey. And I do see the gems in it at this point.
Your poetry would not be what it is if you were not sensitive. You are the writer that you are because you are so highly attuned to your feelings and the feelings of other people and your observations of the world. You can't not be so sensitive and be the artist that you are.
Yeah, I feel that. And I feel I've noticed the things that have tended to be the scariest to share because they are so personal and have really been excavated from a very deep place within myself are the things that people have been most reactive to, and on both sides of the spectrum. I think there's something interesting that happens when you're really honest and share your truth. People are going to react very strongly to that, one way or the other. And I've actually at this point started to, it still hurts my feelings, I'm not going to lie, but I've started to kind of enjoy playing in that space where, as long as I'm not being harmful, that's one thing. But if I'm creating a strong reaction in people, I feel like I've done my job, because I feel like I'm just sharing my truth, and it's inviting people to really feel a whole lot of feelings. And I think that's important. So it's still a challenge and a journey for me, but I've learned to really enjoy the ride.
And so talking about enjoying the ride, how do you support yourself when you have celebration in this space? And has that been really easy? You mentioned it's also been something you've had to navigate. How do you celebrate yourself, and what does that look like, and what have been the challenges within that?
Yeah, I think especially when I released the book, that was a big deal for me. It was scary. It was very labor intensive. I'm very much a recovering perfectionist. So it drove me crazy. I was like trying to figure out what line spacing. I was like, okay, is it 1.1 or 1.2?
I was like, Gina, I love you. Do not send me another message about the line spacing. Oh, that's already done. Move on, honey. Move on.
Yes. So, which speaks again to like having your support team, because I really needed that because I could have been in that getting ready phase forever and just never felt like it was ready. So it was so helpful to me to have people who were honest with me and encourage me to just get it done. And I remember once I finally did it, it was months, or I guess really years in the making. And it was such a big energetic output with a big response that I just felt it was like there was this big expansion and then this really big contraction, because it was like a lot of output and a lot of myself moving outward. And I really had to come back into my little cocoon to recharge and rest. And I don't think I really let myself fully celebrate it at the time, because it was a big deal for me. It was the biggest thing I have produced so far, this thing that I birthed. And I think it was scary because on social media, I'm sharing with generally people who are kind of in my circle, or they're connected to me because they like what I'm doing. And there was something very vulnerable about sending it out beyond those outer edges, where some people might hate it. And then it's been a hard thing for me to accept praise and feel good about myself and what I've done for fear of it being ego, or there's a lot of conditioning wrapped up in that if I acknowledge anything good about myself, then I'm conceited or whatever the story is. But it's really, those kinds of stories have made it hard to really celebrate myself and just to create. Because it really started out with just me in my bedroom and a notebook and doing it for me. And as soon as I started sharing, it's been a delicate balance of continuing to create for myself and not make it about likes or book sales or, how people are going to react to it. Yeah, so it's been a dance and a journey to let myself celebrate and also just take care of myself through the harder moments.
So let's talk about if you're starting out in this journey of starting to express yourself more freely, and whether you do or do not have an interest in then sharing it with the world. Is there anything else you want to add to what that looks like, or ways to interact with yourself during that process of trying?
I think just to really keep it playful and have fun with it. I think if it stops being fun, what's the point? Most everything I've ever written is just in a notes app on my phone, which some people I think are horrified that I don't write in a notebook. But I just kind of collect inspiration. Sometimes it's literally a word that I've never heard before. And I'm like, ooh, that's good. I'm going to use that in something. Or it'll be a sentence or someone else's poem or something I see. Or I'm always just kind of gathering. And I think we probably all get those little nudges and might not think they're worth leaning into or exploring or hanging on to. So I just really like to collect little treasures. And sometimes I won't do anything with them for 6 months, but they're there and I have them to come back to. So I think, I just really encourage everyone to keep that playful, curious spirit and don't write anything off as silly or insignificant or unworthy. It doesn't have to have any other purpose other than creating just to create and have fun and express.
And if we do want to share that eventually with someone else, what's your strategy on choosing the first people, the first way of sharing?
I think for me, it was important to early on share with people that, like I said, I just really trust with my heart and my sensitivity. And I kind of fumbled through that a little in the beginning too, because sometimes I would share things and it would be met with sarcasm or snide remarks that, they're not really funny. I think sometimes this can shift relationships. When you start to really express who you are fully, I think you can learn very quickly who your people are. So that can be a scary and challenging part of this process, I think, because there are people that will tend to fall away. So I don't think there's any perfect way to do that. Like I said, I sometimes share things with people that later I was like, that was not the person to share this part of me with. You find who your people are and who you can trust with that.
Yeah. And I like the phrase early adopters, like early support people. Be strategic with who you share with and give yourself permission to ask for the type of support that you want. It might feel kind of clunky at first, but if you are a writer and you've written a poem and you haven't ever shared a poem with anyone before, but you do have this person, you have this friend that loves you and supports you, you can say, I have this poem. I've never shared anything I've ever written with someone before, and I would love to share it with you. Will you help me learn it's okay to share this by telling me, like, it's good that I wrote it and something you like about it, and just focus on the positive stuff for now. And later, if I do want some critical feedback or ideas, you're also someone I would come to. And for right now, can we just really, with words or with excitement, or like, ask for what you want? Because if this is someone that supports you, then they're also going to want to know how to best support you. And so giving them that exact request can be really helpful.
Yes. I remember several times you asking me, like with the book, for example, you're like, well, what is your goal? And I remember saying, I just want to birth this thing. I just want to create it. And you reminded me of that several times later when I got caught up with any other measure of success. You're like, well, you achieved your goal. My goal was literally just to share it. And I did. And that is huge and worth celebrating, regardless of what happens after that.
So as we close, if you've been listening to this and the things that Gina and I are saying are like hitting you with, that's me. I do want to embrace my voice, and I am nervous and I am really sensitive. Like, how do I navigate that? Gina, what is a message you have for that person?
You have medicine that the world needs right now. You have a gift and gems inside of you that no one else in the world have, and no one else in the world can offer in the way that you can. It's okay to just start where you are and share from where you are now. And you don't need to wait for it to be perfect or polished. You can just create for the joy of creating. And I guarantee people are going to be inspired by that, and people are going to be so grateful that you did.
So how can we keep up with you, Gina? Where can we find your book? Where are you in the world?
So you can find my book, The Wild Will Call You Back, most any place that books are sold. And my website is ginapuorro.com. I have the books linked there, and my social media is linked there as well. I'm planning some classes and a retreat. So if you would like to stay up to date on what I'm offering, you can sign up for the mailing list.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Gina, for being here. I love you forever. This has been so fun to celebrate you and learn about your process, because you are such an example of how much your voice does matter. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. I love you so much. And thank you for sharing your voice, because we need you.